Matt, thank you for that live report. The Biden administration is expected to announce plans to send Patriot air defense missiles over to Ukraine in hopes of helping them in their war against Russia.
Western Mass News reporter Paris Dunford is getting answers from a local military expert on what this could mean for the war and even business here in the Bay State. Paris.
Chris, Mary, the U.S. government is considering sending the Patriot missiles to Ukraine in the upcoming days if their plan is approved. However, the fear is that Russia could retaliate against the U.S. Two U.S. officials are saying the Biden administration is expecting to send the Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine in a matter of days, something Ukraine natives living here in Massachusetts believe is a crucial step forward.
I think it would be a huge improvement to overall their defense system. So I'm definitely happy about it. And hopefully other countries will step it up and will provide more.
Western Mass News wanted to know the importance of this decision and what it could mean for the U.S. So we took our questions to the experts. Gary LaFord is a retired associate professor of international business from American International College, as well as a retired U.S. Army officer. He tells us many fear that U.S. involvement could lead to an even bigger problem, possibly nuclear war.
This now has the natural tendency to escalate the war where it eventually leads to a confrontation between Russia, the U.S., and NATO, which could quickly escalate to some type of a nuclear confrontation, probably at the tactical nuclear level.
The Patriot battery is a defense mechanism, an advanced long-range air defense system that has the potential to shoot down Russian missiles and aircrafts far from the intended targets. Something that would be integral in Ukraine's fight against Russia, as it's under a daily blast of Russian missile and drone attacks that have destroyed key infrastructure like their electrical grid.
A typical battery will generally have up to 8 launchers, and each launcher will have up to 4 missiles. So it represents a sizable increase of air defense capability.
Despite the fear of Russia's retaliation, this decision could have a positive impact on business here in the Bay State. The company that produces the system, Raytheon Technology Corporation, actually has a facility here in Massachusetts that produces parts.
Especially if it means increasing more than just one battery, will definitely provide work opportunities and job opportunities for Raytheon that's still heavily that is still here in Massachusetts.
Now, this decision has not yet been formally announced by the Biden administration. However, once it is, the plan will still have to be approved by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin before it is finally signed by President Joe Biden. And then the shipment is expected to happen shortly after that. Now, coming up tonight at 6, we check in with a local church that is still sending multiple packages to Ukraine, helping people live through that war. But for now, reporting live in studio, Paris Dunford for Western Mass News.